Good afternoon. Welcome to Cannabis Live. I'm Travis Copenhaver. I'm joined today with Cannabis Legal Group's Simon Gumma. Welcome, Simon.
Greetings.
We're here today. We're going to talk about what Simon Gumma's a CPA that works with Cannabis Legal Group, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the CPA's role in the medical marijuana facilities licensing application process. Simon works with us. He has an office in Troy. And he's primarily who we use for the CPA attestations required on the applications we work with here at Cannabis Legal Group. So welcome to our 60-second episode. Feel free to like, share, comment on our videos. We're happy to jump back in after the show, answer any questions. But I'm going to get right into it. Simon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Greetings again. So I do work with Cannabis Legal Group. I do have an office in Troy, and I advise and consult people in this arena, in the cannabis business arena, regarding assisting with attestations, corporate structure, 280E mitigation opportunities, and things of that nature. So it's a very fluid industry, and it's continuing to evolve, and it's a great group of guys to work with here at the Cannabis Legal Group. So
we're definitely glad to have you. So.
Yeah.
Well, Simon, what I'd like to do today is just kind of go over just basically what you do when we're working on an application and what your role kind of is. And to start, can you just give us a quick overview of what CPAs are expected to do for applicants as they're pursuing one of these licenses?
Sure.
Great.
So with the attestations, we typically start with, or what I like to start with, is the applicant's tax return, so I can get a general idea of their background and what assets I would be looking for and the type of businesses they're involved with. And I put together it's not a compiled financial statement, but it's a financial statement that I attest to using agreed upon procedures administered by the AICPA. And we take a look at bank statements, brokerage statements, all types of assets and different accounts, and your liabilities is a big thing. So we put all that together, and I attest to the information being provided as accurate and correct and true. And I put together a report, provided to Lara with certain language that Lara is looking for, because what I found with Lara is that they're sending back a lot of these attestations that are provided to them because of incorrect wording. And Lara wants CPAs to use guidance administered by the AICPA, so there's to be certain language in there that we CPAs follow in order to provide these attestations.
Right. So when you're an applicant to the MMFLA, you have to provide an attestation of your financial situation. It's used for quite a few different things. It's kind of to verify your current financial status as an applicant or a supplemental applicant. It's also used to verify capitalization. And the actual attestation itself is it's not just a financial summary. It's not a full-blown audit. It's kind of something in between, right?
Correct.
So can we kind of talk about like what it is and isn't? Like how does it differ from a full-blown audit? Is it just not requiring as much, or?
It's not requiring as much. A full-blown audit would mean we would have to trace all the sources of income from the original source to present time, and that's really time sensitive and very costly. So a compilation is just putting data together, and that's not what Lara wants. Right. They want CPAs to attest and verify information for its accuracy. So it's somewhere in between, and we take a look at credit reports to verify liabilities. We pull title searches to verify if there's any liens on real estate holdings, and we're verifying information. We're making phone calls, we're putting valuations on businesses, and we are attesting to the accuracy of this information, of the financial information of the applicant.
Got it. So you touched on this briefly, but so those are some of the items you use when you're actually putting these together. I know when I've been working with you, obviously it's the most, what's important, what seems to be emphasized to me is recent bank statements for all the accounts you're going to have to disclose, your most recent tax returns and things
Right.
like that. I know that we, are having all of our supplemental applicants and applicants filing credit reports and things like that. How does that help you, and what are these different items help you determine, basically? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit already.
Okay, so not only is Lara looking for the assets, they also want to know the liabilities that the applicants have. So we're looking for recent financial statements, brokerage statements, bank statements, and as I mentioned before, we're having clients allow us to make phone calls if necessary to verify certain information. We pull, as I mentioned earlier, title searches. We put valuations on different businesses to be able to tell the state, hey, this is the overall financial picture of this applicant. Here's their assets. Here's their liabilities, and the difference of the two is their net worth.
Right.
And then we spell out where the capitalization is actually being met, where the liquidity items are actually being provided for. And another thing we do look at is the credit report. And we just have a client pull their annual credit report, the free one. It doesn't have to be a hard inquiry. And I take a look at that to verify maybe there's credit cards that these applicants forgot that they have, or a loan that they had years ago that they didn't disclose.
Right.
So that does help.
And it also helps us make sure that the actual application itself or supplemental application is being filled out correctly as well. So Simon, your role is very, very present focused. So when I'm helping a client collect the materials required for their step one application, we have to provide 3 years of bank statements, 3 years of tax returns, 3 years of W-2s and 1099s. So they're getting a historical history of what led all the way up to the present. So that doesn't mean you have to go back to 2014 and run tax returns and things. Your role in this is very much focused on showing where they are today and making sure that the capital that they're presenting is in line with what they think it is, correct?
That's correct. I'm looking at a current statement of financial condition, and I'm verifying and being able to substantiate that data.
Right. And I think it's important to emphasize that because the state wants both. They want to see your historical financial perspective,
right,
but they also want to see your current financial ability. And what that lets them do is make sure that the applicant and its team is ready to actually go operate and be capable of meeting all their obligations on the way to getting your license up and running. So we have a question. I think that's a pretty good question. Thanks, Brad. If an applicant, here, I'll see if I can add it to the broadcast for everybody here. If an applicant who has bad or no credit, will they have the ability to attract an investor? Would it be approved? What's kind of the issue if somebody doesn't have the best credit and wants to be a part of this?
So having bad credit is not going to, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not going to impede your application. It just, you had a bad history, but we still pull that report and verify what debts you have or had.
Right.
So maybe you will have a harder time attracting investors.
Here's what I like to tell people. So just in scope, you have the company itself as your primary applicant or your entity applicant. It's usually an LLC, a corporation. It can be a partnership, a nonprofit, however you want to proceed. And then you have what's called true parties of interest or the supplemental applicants. And we'll talk about capitalization here in a moment. The company, the primary applicant, needs to meet the capitalization requirements. Each individual person with control, equity, management, a relationship to the company that makes them a supplemental applicant has to have their background check. They have to have a financial background check. So someone's net worth as an individual may be low. They might have poor credit. They might have negative equity. They might have,
right,
they might owe more money than they have.
Right.
That in and of itself doesn't disqualify the overall picture. That individual person, or maybe even a group of people in that situation, aren't the primary applicant. They can be a part of a bigger group as long as somewhere in the whole team, the company as a whole can demonstrate the capitalization. And I will say, if everyone on the team is showing poor, credit, poor financial ability, the state might take issue with that company's ability to actually meet the obligations. And you might just, as a practical standpoint, not be able to demonstrate the capitalization requirements, right, if you don't have it. But the ability to attract an investor is going to be kind of a case-by-case basis. A lot of that's going to come down to, I'm sure a lot of people have the skill set that's going to be valuable here. You might not necessarily have the dollars to back it up. So, don't feel like if you're not the person in the most healthy financial situation, that doesn't mean there's not a place for you on these teams, but they might have to meet those financial obligations from another source. So,
right. You might have some challenges, but
exactly,
they can be overcome.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, in America and capitalism, having more money is always going to make this easier,
right,
but
right,
don't feel like you're prohibited from being a part of it.
Right.
So we've mentioned capitalization a few times. Just for everyone's reminder, part of the application process is meeting a minimum capitalization requirement. Just to run through them quickly, there's 3 levels for growers, Class A, B, and C. The capitalization requirements are $150,000, $300,000, and $500,000. For provisioning centers and processors, the capitalization requirement is $300,000. And then for secure transporters and safety compliance facilities, the capitalization requirement is $200,000. If I went through that too quickly, I guarantee you it's all over law's website. For capitalization, you need to have a minimum of 25% of your capitalization demonstrated be a liquid asset, which means you can have up to 75% be what would be in the category of non-liquid. So a big part of what the CPA attestation letter is going to do is verify that the company as a whole, the primary applicant, can meet that capitalization requirement. And you have to demonstrate where the different sources of funds are coming from. And one of the main questions I always get, and I'd love to get your opinion on it, is, okay, what assets can we use?
Right. So cash is king, as we all know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Lara wants us to verify that this money being used is seasoned, that it's not illegal money and people are just trying to,
Right.
clean their money per se. So what assets can be used? Cash, brokerage accounts, IRAs, any money that you want to earmark for this venture.
Mm-hmm.
You could even use real estate holdings. You can leverage real estate. You can use inventory and equipment as well.
So I think where it gets confusing is what of those assets can count. So liquid assets are easier to understand. It's cash and cash equivalents. If you can, get access to those funds quickly, then they're going to count. And there are a lot of things that might fall into that category. Some might be context dependent. I had a group of people ask me one time if livestock was liquid, and I'll tell you right now, I don't know. It sounds like it could be if it's something you could sell or leverage and things.
Right.
But what gets a little more complicated is non-liquid assets. So the examples I like to use is, let's say the group owns the property the facility is going to be located at. So clearly that it has value that you can use for the project. Right. How do we determine what that value is?
So we pull comps, we pull historical data depending on the market and the location of that asset. So we look at recent sales, and we also we look at the tax base in that market, the demographical area, and then we also take a look at the assessed value. And then we make a determination as to what that value would be. There's always going to be a little bit of ambiguity with that. Someone's going to maybe value something a little bit more or a little bit less. But again, it's not rocket science. We're getting to a number that's very reasonable,
right.
Not very aggressive, not very conservative, but something very fair in today's market.
We're not trying to lowball the value of that asset, but we also we can't claim it's worth $10 million if everyone's going to think that they're not. Right. So we try to come up with what I would say is a reasonable value. The same thing applies when you're using equipment. Let's say you're a grower and you have a ton of cultivation equipment you've already purchased. And again, as we mentioned in other shows, these numbers were originally supposed to be all liquid, and then the understanding was a lot of these companies have already acquired real estate, already spent money on some of these assets, and they should be able to use the value of that, which is in furtherance of the company. The question I get a lot, and the one that's a little more confusing, is what about, let's say I have a vacation home in Florida and I own it outright. Can I use that?
So property in Florida would only benefit you if you're going to leverage that property.
Right. It's my individual property. It's not necessarily my company's.
Right. So property in Florida is not going to have a beneficial use to your operation here in Michigan unless you leverage it and pull equity out and use that capital to fund your project.
And that's the trick. See, no one's saying that asset doesn't have value. You just need to show how that values the actual cannabis applicant. So if you can take a loan against that and use the proceeds of that loan, if you can get a home equity line of credit and pull some capital and put that into the name of the company, then you can use your asset to meet a capitalization requirement, but you can't skip those steps.
Right.
Another thing I'd like to mention for capitalization requirements, and this will flow us into some other questions I have for you, is as we all know, it can be difficult to obtain a bank account if you're flagged as a cannabis business. That's going to be changing in the next few years here, but as a lot of these businesses gear up to file these applications, start collecting money from their investors, you don't always have the ability to have a bank account for your cannabis applicant business and put all the money in there. So a lot of the teams I'm working with will have investors hold that money in their private personal accounts. We clearly are going to be disclosing it. We know where it is because it's all over your disclosure requirements in step 1. It's going to be on your paperwork in the capitalization steps when we're putting the attestation letter together. But it's not enough. Like, let's imagine, which trust me, I don't have this. Let's imagine I have $1 billion in my bank account and I'm a member of a cannabis applicant group. Well, clearly, it seems pretty easy for me to meet the capitalization requirement. I'm a member of the company. The company needs to meet, say, $300,000 for a provisioning center, and I own $1 billion, right? But what's not happening is the connection between me as an individual and the company I happen to be a part of. So what we need to do, and what law is going to require applicants to do, is either draft a promissory note or fill out the statement of moneylender form and say, okay, of my private assets as one of the investors of this company, this X amount of money is going to be dedicated to the company. It's going to be sitting in my account so everyone knows where it's at. But the company can have a valid claim to the amount I set forth for it. Right. And that's the step that it seems like a lot of applicants are skipping, and it's perfectly reasonable because these are closely held companies. Sometimes there's only one applicant. Even if I am a sole member LLC, that is a separate legal entity than me. So you need to say what of your private money as an individual is yours and what of your private money as an individual is flagged and earmarked and dedicated to the company. Right. So have you filled out statement of moneylender forms? Have you reviewed that?
Yes.
They're pretty straightforward. It's just, where's the money coming from? How much are you promising? And can you prove it's there? It's pretty similar to the disclosure requirements. You're going to basically be meeting most of them as you prepare these materials anyway. And we're in a new office here. If you can't tell, our new gigs, we're in Mr. Gumma's office here. So thanks for having us today.
Yeah, no problem.
So just ignore the phone, not a huge deal. But yeah, so more or less, we kind of march through what the CPA does. And as far as the application goes, it's one piece of a pretty much greater pile. Any impressions about your experience working on these applications or working with Laura?
Yeah, working with Laura. Laura's been very receptive, and Laura has actually reached out to the MICPA, which is the state governing body here for CPAs in Michigan, and reached out to the MICPA and even other CPAs to assist with these attestations, because Laura's receiving attestations that don't really qualify and meet the requirement that they're looking for. A lot of these attestations that are coming in are merely compilations with no verification or attestations provided by the CPA. So Shane Berry over at the MICPA reached out, and I've been in contact with him, and he's been in contact with other CPAs to try and not advise but recommend a streamlined and standard for the attestations, and hopefully something will be released soon. I thought something would have been released by now, but things take.
They got a lot of things to work out and release.
They do. So, and because of that, they're really trying to receive these attestations that are more uniform and have some type of a standard methodology behind them, because they're getting anything and everything, and they're kicking back a lot of them.
Great.
Yeah.
So, if anyone has questions about what we've gone over today, please feel free to jump on the comments and we'll get back and answer them after the show too if you're not watching us live. But Simon, you do a lot of other things as a CPA in the cannabis space. Are there some topics you want to kind of touch on? We can talk about how they impact cannabis businesses and planning for this.
Sure. So the biggest item would be 280E. Mm-hmm. And we work on different strategies to mitigate 280E as best as possible, depending on the license that you're going to implement in your operations. 280E may have a huge and significant impact on your business, or it may have a minimal impact, depending. So,
and for everyone who's not aware, 280E is the provision of the IRS tax code that does not allow businesses engaged in the trafficking of marijuana to take traditional business deductions. So what that means from a practical standpoint is if you're in the cannabis industry, your tax bill every year is going to be significantly higher than most other industries, right? So what are some, we don't have to go into the gritty details, but what are some of the strategies and decisions we make when we're thinking about a 280E issue?
Sure. So corporate structure is always a big player here, because if you have a grow operation, 280E is probably going to have a lesser of an impact than having a provisioning center. So some of the strategies we implement are a vertical type corporate structure where we spread out different segments of the operations between different corporations. Mm-hmm. If you just want to have one dispensary or one provisioning center, tax planning may not be significant, but most people are applying for multiple licenses. So some type of corporate planning and tax planning should be implemented from the onset.
And Simon is available to anyone, whether you're working with Cannabis Legal Group or not, when it comes to figuring out what kind of structure or strategy you want to take. And I would encourage you to reach out to him or a CPA when you're making these decisions, because if you start implementing some of these strategies, they're going to have impacts on the actual application itself. As you're marching through your step one disclosures, you need to know the corporation that's going to be your primary applicant. You have to list all of the companies associated with that. All of the members of those companies become supplemental applicants, and you can, after you get a license, change your structure and set up, differently. But that requires you to submit an application to the state and wait for the state to approve you before you can truly shift your operation into that new model. So getting the license is very important. You need to get up and running and start actually operating these businesses. But once that business is ready to mature and think about the structural changes they want to make, if you have the time to make some of these decisions now, you can submit your original application with this structure in place, so you don't have to go back and wait for the state to approve you to change it later. So, if you do design a strategy where you want to have different companies holding different assets, maybe you have companies leasing back to the applicant so that you can have a holding company on the real estate, another company on your LLC. Making those decisions before you jump straight forward into the step one application is going to save you a lot of time and waiting for the state to approve any changes you make moving forward. There's also going to be implications on your local municipal applications as well. The governments, both the local and the state, need to approve of these changes before you're just allowed to implement them. The same way that if you want to add a new investor, that investor needs to go through the same background check as everyone else. Adding a new company is the same as adding a new human to the situation. You have to make the equity adjustments in your operating agreements and your shareholding agreements. You need to, submit all of the required disclosures a company needs to make. It has to go before the board for approval, and then you need to wait until they say, yes, you can do this. So, if you're right now in a structure you don't like, you're going to be renewing these applications every year. It almost makes more sense to, year 2 or year 3, when you're ready to make this change, do so at that time, because you're going to be renewing the application anyway. But if you think you're going to get a license and then 2 months later, restructure everything, well, you're going to be kind of in a pickle, because that requires a brand new application. That requires, in some cases, perhaps another regulatory assessment fee of $48,000, depending on your license type. So if you're not thinking about that before you submit this application, you might be stuck with that scenario for at least a year until you renew in year 2. So,
right. And there may be tax implications with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an S corporation that later converts to a C corporation, you may have a tax issue there, or vice versa, from going from a C corporation to an S corporation, where you may have previously untaxed dollars. Setting something up is very important on the onset, but also implementing it later is where the CPA really provides the value, because now you need somebody that understands your business model and can apply the code accordingly to mitigate any kind of tax issues that you may come across.
Right. And if you're working with a professional to help you with your application, whether it's an attorney or a non-attorney consultant, whatever it is, that person needs to be aware of not only the current situation, but the future situation. Just like what those decisions are going to do and make an impact on what I do, which is help companies get applications and licenses in. Those decisions we make that might be best for the application might not be the best from your tax situation. There should be a pretty reasonable flow of information between your professionals, your CPA, your attorneys, your consultants, whoever's assisting you with these projects. And this, is very important in the medical space, but it's important for any business that requires licensure. So even after November, whether you're going for a huge, giant adult use grow or a micro business, one of the smaller businesses, or Class A under the adult use laws, you're still going to be making these same decisions. It's just a matter of scale. And you can save yourself a lot of headache if you put the effort in on the front end to think about not only what you need to do in the present, but as you grow, the way you want to grow. Because we might be able to, I might, or Simon might, or the professionals you're working with might be able to help you avoid a significant amount of work and headache if we know that's the direction you wanted to go.
Right.
So,
okay.
Great. Any other items we want to talk about?
Yeah, something else that may be an issue coming up is back in November, if this passes, is regarding sales tax with the cannabis in the industry. If the citizens of the great state of Michigan pass their recreational marijuana. So there's currently sales tax at 6% at the provisioning center level, plus a 3%, actually it's 3% first,
Right.
And then it's 6% sales tax on top of that.
So just like any sale of a widget, you're paying 6% sales tax on. For medical marijuana businesses, they pay 3% excise tax on top of gross receipts.
Right. Right. So if we have recreational marijuana here in Michigan, which I think we will.
Go vote.
Right. So there's going to be a 10% excise tax
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be implemented. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the 3% excise tax on the medical marijuana side will go away.
Yeah, it's important to emphasize the medical marijuana program right now sets up an excise tax program, and excise tax is paid out based on the total number of medical marijuana facilities in counties and in municipalities. It's prorated. So the more facilities in your community, the more of this excise tax funding you're going to get. Once adult use passes, or if adult use passes, the excise tax from medical businesses falls off. It does no longer exist. All excise tax on marijuana in Michigan is on the adult use side. It's a 10% number for all. Medical marijuana, but in November, if we pass this law, and at some point we're going to transition and have licenses, so there'll be a period of time where that excise tax will still be paid. But at some point, we're going to shift and have businesses that sell adult use products, and that's going to have a 10% excise tax on it. But if you're a patient and you're buying medical products, you'll no longer be subjected to the excise tax. And the proceeds of the adult use excise tax will be spread out the same way, very similar to the medical one, but only based on the retail stores and micro businesses in your community. So, while it's going to be kind of a stopgap for adult medical marijuana provisioning centers and excise tax, it will eventually fall off, whether it's the November ballot or a different law that legalizes marijuana. So even if November doesn't pass and another effort is put forth and we pass adult use marijuana in some way, shape, or form, if our legislature ever passes adult use marijuana, that same provision sunsets in the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. Right. And that's going to have an impact on, the way these businesses operate and what they need to account for.
Right. And there'll be a separate license, right,
yep.
for these businesses where you can have one dispensary, we'll call it, for medical marijuana, and another store for adult use. So more to come, but just a heads up on that if this does pass, which I think it will. It's very fluid, right? So everything keeps changing.
And no matter what the status of marijuana laws are in Michigan today, they will continue to evolve. After November, another year after that, we'll always be continually improving and making adjustments to the marijuana laws in Michigan. So Simon, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have tax or accounting questions, we'd be happy to connect you through Simon. He's part of the Cannabis Legal Group. You can get meetings and talk to him calling us directly, so feel free to reach out to us. But Simon, tell me a little bit about your actual office and what you do and some of the services.
Sure, yeah. So my office is in Troy, and I work with 100% small business owners. So all my clients are folks like you on the other end that are entrepreneurs. And we focus on tax planning, corporate structure, and most recently the cannabis industry. So I work with a lot of retail developers and hospitality developers, as well as professionals, lawyers, doctors, and attorney or dentists. So we're here to help. Whether you use me or even the Cannabis Legal, we're here to help. We want to be a resource. If you're going to work with, you should be working with a CPA in this arena, because it's very critical that you do work with someone that understands the complexities of the tax code that could impact your business. So make sure you ask the tough questions regarding whether your CPA is familiar with 280E and types of tax planning and corporate structure that they can offer you. And don't be afraid to ask those tough questions, because at the end of the day, it could mean a significant amount of tax dollars that you're paying to the IRS that maybe you could pocket yourself. And again, everything within the code. So
there's no shame in not spending money you don't have to.
Right. So there's a handful of CPAs out here that are working in this arena. I talk to pretty much all of them on a regular basis. We all collaborate. We want to do the right thing for our clients, and just make sure you do work with someone that's familiar with this industry. And we're here to help. Reach out to me, reach out to Travis and the rest of Barton's team, And, like I said before, we're here to be a resource, and we're here to help.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me
My
today,
pleasure.
Simon.
This was fun.
I'm flying
Love to do it
solo.
again.
Yeah, the team
Yeah.
is a bit busy on Friday this afternoon here.
Right.
So, but thanks so much for joining us today in Cannabis Live. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend,
All right.
everybody.
Take care.